Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. I am honestly just absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today because, well, we're going to unpack something that is just truly extraordinary. Seriously, if you are a creator or a writer, maybe a professional in any field, or honestly, if you're just someone who's trying to navigate this incredibly complicated world while, actually staying true to who you are, this one's for you. We are looking at a recent and frankly profoundly moving moment. I'm talking about Taylor Swift's 2026 induction into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Picture this. She steps up to the podium and her voice is actually a little bit hoarse, which is kind of funny because it was from screaming at a basketball game the night before. But she gets up there and she delivers a speech that is, no exaggeration, nothing short of an absolute masterclass on creativity, on resilience, and on art itself. So, to really kick us off right, I want to start with a quote. Good and true things are easy. So, Swift actually opened her whole speech with this exact line. And the backstory is amazing. It was originally spoken to her by Kate Capshaw, who is the wife of the legendary director Steven Spielberg. The story goes that Swift had asked Spielberg to be the one to induct her, and despite the fact that he had this massive movie release literally hours later, he just agreed, without hesitation. No way, right? So when Swift actually tried to give him a polite out, worrying about his crazy schedule and saying he didn't have to do it, Capshaw just chimed in and simply replied, "Good and true things are easy." Swift took that beautiful, completely simple realization, and she used it as the entire anchor for her reflection on what is now a 23-year career in music. Think about that. Amidst all the wild chaos, the brutal industry battles, the complete and total loss of privacy, the ego wars, all of it, the one single thing that always remained easy because it was fundamentally good and true was the actual songwriting itself.
And honestly, that brings us right to the absolute core of today's Explainer. We are diving deep into Taylor Swift's creative philosophy, and we are pulling this directly, straight from the source of this 2026 Hall of Fame speech. What we're going to do is distill her words into real, practical takeaways that you can actually pick up and apply to your very own creative endeavors. Because, this isn't just about the music industry. It's so much bigger than that. It's really about how to approach your life's work with just this relentless preparation. It's about how to fiercely protect your own peace of mind from critics, and maybe most importantly, how to stay completely grounded in genuine human connection when, let's face it, the entire world right now seems completely obsessed with data and algorithms. So if you are ready to learn exactly how one of the single most successful songwriters in human history constructs her art and somehow protects her sanity while doing it, well, you are in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for how we're going to tackle this today. First up, the instinct of songwriting. Then number 2, the Nashville hustle. Number 3, trusting human intuition. Number 4, surviving the critics. And finally, number 5, the ultimate fan connection. All right, let's get into it. So moving right along to section 1, the instinct of songwriting, discovering a natural vocation. Now, early on in her speech, Swift made this really clear distinction between the absolute, grueling reality of the music business on one side and the pure act of writing a song on the other. And it makes so much sense when you think about it. I mean, navigating the industry, having to learn choreography, trying to figure out how on earth to entertain a massive stadium full of people, and fiercely protecting her own sanity through all of it, that required massive amounts of trial and error. She literally called it chaos and calamity. But the actual act of writing, that was totally instinctual. It was kind of like the quiet eye of the hurricane for her. And you really have to notice just how incredibly rapidly that instinct developed into a concrete, real-deal vocation. I mean, check this timeline out. At just 12 years old, 12, she learned 3 chords on a guitar and basically immediately wrote her first song. Then flash forward just 2 years. By age 14, she had already secured a publishing deal in Nashville, Tennessee. And now, celebrating a 23-year career, she stands there, fully inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. But you know what? I actually want to pause for a second on that middle milestone, age 14. Because moving to Nashville at that age, that wasn't just like some casual family road trip. It wasn't a summer vacation. Her parents and her brother completely uprooted their entire lives in Pennsylvania to relocate to the songwriting capital of the world. And why would they do that? Well, because, as she noted in her speech, it became just glaringly obvious to everyone around her that this wasn't just some temporary, fleeting tween phase. Her family really recognized that this was a deep, undeniable calling. It was the real deal.
And the roots to that calling, they started incredibly early. We're talking way back. Even as a small child, her parents recalled driving her home from seeing Disney movies. And sitting right there in the back seat, she wasn't just singing along to the soundtrack like most kids do. Oh no, she was actively changing the lyrics, she was changing the melodies to be about her own life. Even then, she was already reshaping the world around her into her own narrative. It's like her brain was just wired for it. And as she grew up, she became this constant, totally fascinated observer of the human condition. She was just deeply, deeply curious about people's feelings, their passions, their motivations. Why do people do what they do? But the absolute key takeaway that she emphasized right here is that it felt easy to work incredibly hard at this. Like, it felt easy to sit there and watch actual calluses form on the tips of her fingers from playing guitar so much. Nurturing the craft was never a chore for her. It wasn't homework. It was an absolute joy.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Section 2, the Nashville hustle, the rigorous preparation.
Okay, so having natural talent is one thing, right? Lots of people have talent, but translating that raw talent into a full-blown professional career at such a young age, that requires an astonishing, almost scary level of discipline. And this is exactly where we see the transition from being just a kid with a guitar to becoming a really rigorous, professional architect of songs. Seriously, think about this number right here. 100. By the exact time Taylor Swift was 14 years old and walking into those professional co-writing sessions on Music Row in Nashville, sitting down with seasoned, hardened industry veterans, she had already written over 100 songs entirely on her own. 100! I mean, just think about the sheer volume of output that requires. She absolutely wasn't just sitting around waiting for lightning to strike or for inspiration to magically appear. She was actively generating material every single day. She was building this massive, sturdy foundation of trial and error long before she ever even stepped into a room to collaborate with the so-called experts.
And that actually brings us directly to her specific preparation process, which honestly, I think is incredibly valuable for literally anyone working in any collaborative field today. So, her parents raised her to be overprepared. They taught her to always show up early and, above all, to never, ever assume that the world owes you a single thing. She knew she was young, and she absolutely did not want these seasoned adults to treat her like a baby. Or even worse, to just write a song for her and then slap her name on the credits as a favor. She wanted to earn it. So what did she do? She developed this incredibly rigorous 4-step method. Step 1, she spent almost all of her free time just writing down ideas, just getting it all out. Step 2, she would purposefully stop herself at a certain point. So maybe the song was 50% done or maybe 75% done. She'd stop there and just stockpile those hooks, those choruses, and those melodies into what she playfully called her metaphorical Mary Poppins bag. I love that visual. Then, step 3, she would literally walk into the writing room wearing her everyday high school backpack, sit down, and just start pitching these ideas, playing them on her guitar one by one by one. And finally, step 4, whichever idea resonated the absolute most with her co-writer in that moment, that was the one they would finish together. You see, she viewed songwriting as a full-time vocation from day one. She was taking extreme, proactive ownership of her own creative contribution.
But here's a really interesting question. What happens when you are literally a teenager and your own everyday life just isn't providing enough dramatic material to write hundreds of songs? Because, let's be real, how much drama does a 13-year-old really have? So the crucial point here is that she didn't just throw her hands up and wait around for drama to happen. As she said in her speech, and this is such a great quote, if the idea doesn't come to you, you have to become your own search party and go find it. Isn't that brilliant? Become your own search party. So when she lacked inspiration from her own life, she would literally put on a movie, pause the scene right in the middle, and try to write a whole song from a specific character's perspective. And she wouldn't just pick the hero, sometimes she'd pick the villain. She really explored their vernacular, their hidden motivations, and the complex self-constructed justification systems they had going on in their heads. And this exercise, which is honestly just brilliant, taught her so early on how different people decide what they personally consider to be good and true. It massively expanded her empathy and completely broadened her storytelling toolkit far, far beyond just her own lived experience.
And all of this intense, nonstop preparation, it perfectly sets the stage for what I think is easily one of the best anecdotes from her entire speech. So she finally got the incredible chance to write with one of her all-time heroes, the legendary Nashville songwriter Craig Wiseman. Imagine the nerves, right? She walked in there, nervous but still confident, and she pitched what she firmly believed was her absolute best, nearly finished song out of her whole Mary Poppins bag. She sang the whole thing for him, and his feedback after she finished? Well, quote, he thought it was good, but he didn't really get it. Ouch, right? He basically just passed on it and asked to hear what other ideas she had. Now, they did end up writing a totally different song together that day, and by all accounts, they had a really great productive session. But Swift didn't just toss that first idea in the trash, no way. She went home that very same night. She trusted her own instincts completely, regardless of what her absolute hero had just told her, and she finished that original song completely by herself. And you know what that song turned out to be? Love story? Yeah.
literally one of the biggest crossover hits in history. This is just such a monumental lesson for all of us in respecting the collaborative process, but ultimately, always trusting your own gut.
All right, moving on to Section 3, trusting human intuition, navigating an algorithm-driven industry.
And that instinct, that undeniable deep in your stomach gut feeling, it transitions us so perfectly into this next pillar, because Swift actually took a very specific moment in her speech to directly address the current state of the music industry, an industry that, as we all know, is undergoing these massive, seismic technological shifts right now. And she offered a very firm, completely unapologetic stance on where the true value of art actually lies. And the contrast she paints here brilliantly illustrates the divide she's observing every single day. Just look at this breakdown. On the one side, we have an industry that is becoming increasingly, almost obsessively, consumed by metrics, by data analytics, artificial intelligence, and this just relentless, exhausting desire to predict whether something is going to trend online. But then, on the other side, we have what Swift passionately advocates for: human intuition. Raw instinct, the messy, beautiful reality of actually living and observing the human condition. She argues so powerfully that right now, more than ever before in history, writers need to lean into their human intuition. After literally thousands of hours working at her craft, she doesn't rely on a spreadsheet. She relies on her ability to identify the ideas that physically jump out at her, the ideas that, as she puts it, sparkle and linger. Because let's be completely honest, you cannot program a computer to feel a lingering sparkle. You just can't. That requires a human soul.
To really hammer this point home, impartially speaking, she actually shouted out a fellow artist who was sitting right there in the room with her, an artist named Somber. She praised his exceptional, literally envy-inducing writing skills. And she shared this little behind-the-scenes detail. She said that during these late-night debates she has with her friends about the fraught, confusing state of the modern music industry, her absolute trump card to end the argument is always pointing to artists exactly like him. She literally tells her friends, quote, "Somber is the future, and he does it all on his own, and he doesn't need AI. The kids are fine." I just love that. She is so fiercely championing this core idea that young creators must prioritize what they genuinely love all the way down to their very core rather than relying on automated shortcuts. Because when the trends fade, that core passion, that is the only thing that will actually sustain them over the long haul.
Which brings us to Section 4, surviving the critics, protecting the art.
So why do creators need that core passion to sustain them so badly? Well, because once you create something from a deeply vulnerable, truly human place, you inevitably have to offer it up to a world that, well, let's just say it isn't always kind. Swift made a really hard, fascinating pivot in her speech here, and she actually quoted the television show Yellowstone. The quote she used is, "You build something worth having, somebody's going to try to take it." Now, obviously, while the character in that specific show was talking about a literal physical ranch, Swift used this quote as this incredibly powerful, spot-on metaphor for a creator's self-worth, their peace of mind, and their singular artistic vision. She was giving a very real warning to young writers in the room. She said that if you make anything awesome, anything at all, it is an absolute 100% guarantee that someone, somewhere, is going to say horrible things about it, or they're going to aggressively twist your meaning into something completely unrecognizable to you. The attacks on your art, and by extension, the attacks on you as a person, they are an inevitable constant in this world. You simply cannot avoid them.
So the big question is, how on earth do you survive that without completely losing your creative spark? How do you not just shut down? Well, Swift described this really delicate daily balancing act that all creators must conduct, which we can basically define here as durable sensitivity. It's a paradox, right? Because on one hand, inherently, a songwriter has to be completely porous. You literally have to let the world in. You have to feel things deeply, sensitively, almost to the point of outright delusion, just so you can actually reflect those complex feelings back to the world. Whether you're writing a 3.5-minute upbeat pop-bop, an angry battle cry, or a sweeping 10-minute song about a lost scarf, you have to be open. But simultaneously, and this is the trick, simultaneously you have to be totally durable. You have to actively harden yourself to the brutal elements of the outside world. I'm talking about the professional critics, the chronically online haters, and yes, the literal bots and robots posing as real people. You have to figure out how to be open enough to accept actual constructive feedback while actively, ruthlessly blocking out the noise that is simply damaging to your creativity.
And a really massive part of building that durability is just accepting a fundamental, undeniable truth about art. Detailed and singular art cannot, and frankly should not, be digested by everyone in the exact same way. Swift made it crystal clear here that no creator should ever try to make art that somehow appeals to everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's a trap.
She completely embraces the fact that some people, they only get her music when they are actively getting their heart broken. Some people only really liked her moody, alternative pandemic album Folklore. Some people only want to hear the upbeat radio hits. And some people just don't like any of it at all, ever. And the beautiful thing is, she is completely and totally unbothered by that. Why? Because she knows exactly where she stands regarding the work she has made. You can't force an encounter with a listener. You can't make them understand it. You can only make the truest work possible and just hope that they bump into it on their own path when the time is right for them.
And that leads us right into our final pillar, Section 5, the ultimate fan connection, the payoff.
So think about everything we've talked about. If you put in those thousands of hours of rigorous, exhausting preparation, if you bravely trust your own human intuition over the data and the algorithms, and if you successfully build the thick skin required to survive the critics, what is the actual ultimate payoff of all that effort? What makes it worth it? The payoff is the deeply personal, incredibly diverse, and sometimes just totally wild ways that actual fans internalize the art. People take her songs and use them as the literal underscore for their own real-life expeditions. They rediscover old lyrics that suddenly make perfect sense when they're navigating a tough heartbreak. They found this incredible solace and comfort in the woodsy storytelling escapism of folklore during the terrifying isolation of the global pandemic. And then, on a hilariously practical level, she shared that someone actually told her they used the song Enchanted specifically every night just to get their baby to stop crying. How amazing is that? And perhaps most profoundly of all, there are fans who listened to her music with their own parents decades ago who are now passing those exact same songs down to their own children today. Swift noted that these moments, even the ones that seem so mundane or small, they are just as magnificent and just as important to her as the massive, grand, historic industry milestones.
Because ultimately, at the end of the day, all of the hustle, all of the armor, all of it boils down to this one singular goal: eliciting a glint of recognition in another human being. That right there is the absolute magic trick of songwriting. Amidst all the endless noise of the world, a simple line or a chord progression cuts through the static, and suddenly a total stranger feels chills. Or maybe they feel just a little bit lighter, or they suddenly think of someone they deeply love. And why does that happen? Because something that felt completely good and true to the writer feels completely good and true to the listener at the exact same moment in time. And suddenly, just like Kate Capshaw said at the very beginning of our explainer today, it's easy. That brief, sparkling connection, that is the highest honor any creator can ever hope to achieve.
So as we go ahead and wrap up this deep dive into Taylor Swift's Hall of Fame masterclass on creativity, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to carry with you throughout the rest of your day. We've seen the totally relentless work ethic, we've seen the courage it takes to actually trust your own intuition, and we've seen the absolute necessity of guarding your creative spirit against a really noisy, chaotic world. So now, I'm turning it over to you. Looking at your own life, your own unique passions, and your own singular perspective on the world. What good and true thing will you build today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep trusting your gut, keep creating, and I will see you all next time.